So you remember that our vision for Hulen Street Church is that we want to be a church and to partner with churches that are irresistible to the lost, indispensable to the church, and a blessing to our city. And so part of that is we want to partner with churches that align with that. And so today we have a chance to hear from a pastor who is part of one of our partner churches. Trevor Downham. Come on up here, Trevor. Trevor Downham, y'all. I'll ignore that. I never get any applause. Gosh. No, Trevor has been a partner. Stop.
There you go.
Trevor, yeah.
You got one fan.
One. Yeah. No, Trevor pastors Norwegian Settlers Church in Port Shepstone, South Africa. He has been a partner, and they have been a partner with us for 10 plus years, our longest standing partnership. The things that they are doing, the way that they are engaging their culture, their city for the kingdom, it's just astonishing. And so he was in the States for a couple of months, just kind of going around and kind of letting people know about what they're doing there and let us know that he was going to be in here. And we wanted to give him a chance for you to hear him and his heart. And also just to know that one day, this craziness will be behind us. Amen. And we'll be able to take teams back to be a part of what you're doing there in South Africa. So y'all please welcome Trevor Downham.
Thank you, Wes Hamilton. Folks, it is really just awesome to be back here amongst you again. I echo what Wes has said. He has not told you rubbish. We have a great partnership. We have so enjoyed, and just for me to reconnect with some of you who've been out there on teams, who have come to be a blessing in our community. I am so looking forward to the day that we can get that whole deal going again. But thank you for allowing me just to come in and spend this time with you. We appreciate your partnership as we are considering ourselves to be family, even though we're thousands of miles away. So we applaud you now for your partnership with us. Thank you so much. Okay, I have some stuff that I have to say to you today. I was given a ride to the church the other day in a taxi, and I was talking to the taxi driver, and I asked him, I said, so how are things in America? And he looks across at me and says, man, it's dark. Did I say that right? It's dark. The Texans speak like that, it's dark. They growl at you. You Texans must growl at people. He growls, it's dark in the USA. Anyway, and he went on to describe the nature of his darkness. And there is. We live in a dark world. Yours is dark. There's elements of darkness here. There's elements of beautiful light that come from here as well. And it's the same where we are at the same time. But it's this theme of darkness. I want to ask you, what do you do when you have to walk in the dark? What do we do when darkness faces us? What do we do when consequences of people's mess-ups and the sadness of viruses that we have got out of control, and the sadness that comes when people don't agree on how do we handle all of this darkness that is so apparently around us? Well, the cliche version is the version that somebody says you just got to trust God in the darkness. And I'm going to tell you, people, it's a cliche because it's true. Who else can you trust in the darkness? You can't trust your politicians in the darkness. You can't trust your bank manager in the darkness. You can't sometimes trust even the people around you, because the nature of darkness is that God says, I am the one who wants to be trusted in a time of darkness. Now, in the book of Romans, we have Paul, the apostle, writing to a church. He's writing from Corinth, and he's writing to the church in Rome, and he's saying to them, guys, it may be dark now, but it's going to get worse. There is a greater darkness than the one you're in right now. They were suffering with the darkness of heresy and all these foreign opinions of who Jesus was and the purpose of being a Christ follower. And that brought a darkness of one side. But he said, man, there's a darkness of persecution that is going to be coming, the darkness of being misunderstood, the darkness of alienation, the darkness of even you losing your life for the cause of Christ. It's just around the corner. And so you can see as Paul is telling these people, it's dark and it's going to get darker. They're thinking in their minds, what do we do? And so Paul gives them this beautiful advice in Romans 8, and you can say it with me, that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And they say, but Paul, is there not more that we got to do? You mean we just got to sit back and suck it up and say all things, good things, bad things, indifferent things, things that make me mad, things that make me sad, things that make me glad, all things work together for good. Apparently, that is the truth. And when we begin to live out of the knowledge, not just in our heads of that truth, but out of a heart experience, then it becomes a reality. And I know that because the first three verses, the first three words of this passage say, and we know that all things work together. This is not just a head knowledge thing of a bunch of people. It's not, and we have heard that all things work together for good. He says, and we know that all things. So this is the power of this passage. It's the personal testimony of a man who's been beaten many times for the cause of the gospel. A man who's been shipwrecked many times, a guy who has suffered in prison. And he's saying, guys, you can trust me because we over here have been through it. We can tell you from personal experience, we know this. Not just in our heads, but in our hearts and in our personal experience. There's nothing more powerful than a personal testimony. And Paul is sharing a personal testimony with these people saying, don't fear, keep trusting God. Because we know, we've been through this stuff. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, called on His purpose. So it's with great confidence that we can take the word of Paul and make this real, I hope, to ourselves today. But I have to tell you, from here, from a preacher's point of view, it's very easy to tell people, just trust God. When the world falls apart, just trust God. When your husband dumps you, just trust God. When you have an untimely death in the family, or someone gets cancer, or someone gets corona, it's very audacious almost of me just to say, well, just trust God. But apparently that's what we're told to do. It's easy to say it, but when you have to do it, it's not all that easy. I remember telling you a story a couple of years back when I was here, but you have such poor memories that you won't remember it. I love this story. I was a young guy who went to a pastor's conference, and the hall is packed with great preachers, and every guy standing up there trying to preach to prove that he's the best preacher in the house. And the chairman of the meeting is sitting up at a table, and he's conducting he's the member of the officiator guy, and he looks down at a young man sitting in the front row, and he says to him at tea time, he says, young man, I've been watching you. You look like you live in this thing. And the kid says, oh, it's so awesome just to soak it all in. These great preachers and watching them. And he says, well, I've got a favor I want to ask of you. The guy who's meant to preach after tea has taken ill. And he's not going to be able to preach this session. You look so full of potential. I want to ask if you will preach that session. And this kid said, but I haven't preached a sermon in my life. He says, just trust God, man. You're going to be fine. But I haven't even got a message in my mouth. He says, just trust God. God will give you a message. Just trust God. I didn't even bring my Bible. He says, well, find one and just trust God. You're going to be fine. Just trust God, kid. And the kid said, oh, man, what the heck am I going to do now? Anyway, he looks up on the stage and he sees a Bible sitting there. So he goes up and he takes the Bible, he opens it, and in the Bible, there's a sermon. Hey, this is so cool. I'm going to preach the sermon. So this kid stood up and he preached the sermon. He found the Bible was the best sermon of the conference. People stood and they applauded him, and he did such a great job. And then he turned around and he saw the bishop. And the bishop was not happy. His face was red. His eyes were bulging. And he ran towards this young man. He said, young man, what have you done? And the kid said, what do you mean, what have I done? He says, you've just preached my sermon. That was the sermon I was about to preach now. And now you've taken my sermon and you've preached my sermon. What am I going to do? And he puts his hand on the shoulder. He says, he says, hey, Bishop, just trust God, Bishop. Just trust God, Bishop. You're going to be fine. You see, it's so easy to tell people to trust God. And yet at the end of the day, people, that's the message of Scripture. So I want to explain to you why this is so important. In the face of darkness and pending darkness, that it could get worse, to know that all things, good, bad, sad, mad, and glad, are all things work together for your good and for God's glory. But I want to talk, first of all, let's see the seed and talk about darkness. Darkness means different things to different people. There are some people, the Bible said, who love darkness because their deeds are evil. They love the dark. And they have this morbid attraction to the dark because they think they can get away with murder because it's done in the dark. There are some people who think that. But for other people, most people, darkness is a place where we sometimes run to find comfort. We run into this place and we think, no one can get me here, no one can mess with me here, and it's a good place for me to be. But the fact is that the darkness that we have, it heightens our senses. When you walk into a dark room, all of a sudden, your senses, your hearing becomes better, your sight becomes better, your adrenaline is sitting there waiting, because darkness has a way of just making us more heightened to the things that might be in the darkness. That's a good thing. It can also be a bad thing if it gets out of hand. Because if your darkness and your senses go too heightened, you begin to imagine things in the dark that do not exist. And that was once one good because you haven't controlled it well, becomes something that can make you fearful when there's nothing there. It's just like a shadow. And I remember as a kid lying in my bed in my room, and there was a tree outside and the light behind the tree, and I could see the shadows and the shapes of this tree moving in the wind. And a kid with my mind and my imagination, I could perceive and I could see so many different shapes, and they frightened me. And I was one frightened little dude. And I would lie there and look at these shapes, couldn't move, only my eyes would move. And I began to think to myself, man, when I turned the light on, there's no fear anymore, because I realized they were just shadows. You do know, people, that shadows can't hurt you. All they can do is make you fearful. And there are many different shadows out there, and we walk in fear of the things that sometimes don't even exist. They're just shadows. One of the greatest fears that we have is this fear of death. And you guys have had to be facing so much of that in the past months, as so too have we. But we have this fear of death. But according to Psalm 23, it's just a shadow. What does it say? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's not the valley of death. If it were the valley of death, I'd say we should fear. But death is not what it appears to be. It's just a shadow. And I love this thought that death is just a shadow. It looks ominous. It's like a bully. It looks so big. It looks so strong. It looks like we can't contend with it. But death is but a shadow, because that which is still to come is far better than that which is right now. And this shadow of death, the shadow is just a blink of an eye and it's gone. And I begin to realize that, God, that's what death is like. It's just a shadow. It's a shadow that makes us fearful, and it's a legitimate fear, but it can't hurt us. It's just a shadow. So look into your life, and there are probably a whole bunch of other shadows. The fear of disappointment, the fear of pending disaster, the fear of disillusionment, the fear of rejection as a teenager. These guys are just shadows. Don't you dare make them bigger than they really are. So we look at these things and we say, well, somehow darkness is an interesting thing because it has this morbid attraction for people who want to do dark. But it's the shadow of the cave that I want to talk about. You know what happens is when we are faced with something that we're fearful of or something we don't understand, we generally head for a cave. I want to read a passage to you in 1 Samuel 22. Here's the context. David, that great king, is heading for a cave. You see, he's so disillusioned. He's so disappointed. He's been serving King Saul. He killed Goliath for King Saul. He's won battles for King Saul. And King Saul is trying to kill him now. And so he says, what have I done? Why is this world so unfair to me that the one I protected, the one I've served, now hates me and wants to kill me? And he's in a state of disillusionment and despair. So he does what we do. He finds himself a cave. Let me read to you about this cave. 1 Samuel 22. David left Gath and he escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress and debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. And then go down to verse 5. But the prophet Gad said to David, he's in his cave now, do not stay in this stronghold. Go into the land of Judah, because the land of Judah is the land of promise. It's the land of fulfillment. He said to him, get out of your cave and fulfill your purpose. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. Now David himself went and found for himself a cave. Now, it was a place where you go where you're hurting and when you're confused. And the first thing that you do is find a cave. Now, a couple of things about this cave. The first thing when you find a cave is you may find something good in the cave. You may find that. I was telling the congregation earlier about a story that I really loved as a kid. And it's a story that goes back to Roman times when they would have dens of lions and slaves. And the slave escaped, this young boy escaped. And he hid for the hills and he found himself a cave to hide in while the Romans chased him. Anyway, he found in the cave that he was sharing the cave with a lion. And the lion was growling, the lion was really grumpy. So he said to the lion, listen, we're on the same thing. They're chasing you, you escaped, they're chasing me. We better share the cave. And the lion has got a thorn in his foot, and the kid sees the thorn and says, I know why you're grumpy. Let me take the thorn out. So he goes over to the lion, picks up his big old foot, and he pulls out this thorn. And the lion is happy and is grateful for what this kid has done. Well, it wasn't long before they were both captured again. And the kid goes back into slavery, and the lion goes back into the den. And then one day, this kid, who's now a man, he escaped again. And he was dragged down to the lion's den and said, right, we've warned you. One strike, you're out. You're going to be fed to the lions. So they throw this kid into the lion's den, and he meets the lion of whom he had helped take the thorn out. And the people stood back and they watched and said, let's watch while the lion eats the slave. The lion didn't eat the slave. He recognized him. And the kid found something good in the cave. Now they let them go, apparently, just to make a nice ending to the story. But here's the deal, people, listen. When you enter that cave of disillusionment, look for something good. Might just be something good in the cave. If there's not, you move on to step number 2. There is a purpose for you in the cave. It's a natural place to go. It would be stupid of me to say, don't find a cave. Find your cave. Look for something good. The second thing that you'll notice when you're in the cave is that a whole bunch of other people are going to come and join you. Because if you noticed how miserable people attract miserable people, you have a look around you when you're miserable. Who do you hang out with? You hang around with other miserable people. And so David found himself in the cave, miserable. Within the next day, 400 other miserable people came and said, David, can we share the cave with you? And David saying, no, you can't. Get out of here. This is my cave. And suddenly he realized that the force of numbers was he was overnumbered. He said, all right, share my cave. But it wasn't long before David, who was a natural leader, he couldn't help it but be a leader. These guys came and they said, David, can you do something with us? And David said, well, not a lot of potential going in here, but I could probably turn you into some little kind of an army thing. So every day he would get them up and they'd do their drill, they'd do their PT, they'd do their exercise and their sword drills and everything. And David turned those 400 people into one of the greatest small fighting forces of the day. And out of that group of people came some, go and read the end of 2 Samuel, some of David's greatest men who stood by him in the battle, did exceedingly great things for David, did things that were greater than what David had done, were people who he found in the cave. And so when miserable people gather around you and you become one of them, let your little light shine. Because that's what David did. He found a purpose whilst he was in the cave. Don't you want to do the same thing? When you're tempted into the cave for whatever reason, look for a good thing, might be there. But if it's not there, find a purpose in the cave. But then there's a third thing here. There's a prophet Gad came to David, and I read it to you. And he said to David, David, do not stay in the stronghold. Now you see what had happened here was his cave had now become a stronghold. That's a good word. It had developed a stronghold on his mind. And David began to develop a cave mentality of pessimism. I want to take you to Psalm 142, which is a psalm that David wrote while he was in the cave. And it's a miserable psalm. It's got no faith in it. It's got no trusting of God in it. It's a miserable point of David's life. And the psalm begins, this is the psalm that David wrote when he was in the cave in Adullam. And it says this, and you'll read there, after the prophet Gad had done his thing, it says that David read this thing. He says, I pour out my complaint to you, God. You better listen to me. I got a few things to say. I tell all my troubles to you. In the pain I walk, men have held and put snares before me. I look to the right and I see no one concerned for me. I don't see anybody caring for my life, he says. And then in verse 7, he comes down to reality and he says, oh God, I think I know what's happened here. Set me free now from my prison. You see, the place he ran to protect himself was the cave. He stayed in the cave too long. The cave mentality became a stronghold. Gad came to him and said, get out of here before your stronghold now becomes a prison. And the prism of pessimism is what you wear in that cave. You wear the robe of pessimism. You know what pessimism is? It's a protection mechanism. It protects you from disappointment. If I'm a pessimist, then I don't have to think good of anybody. If I'm a pessimist, I don't have to hope that something good is going to happen, because it's not. And I protect myself from the disappointment that comes. And when you start thinking like that, you must know that you're in the stronghold phase. It's developed a stronghold in your mind. Now, the prophet Gad is a good word for you. He says, get out of the cave. Get out of your cave. Now, there's many sitting in caves today. Our churches have been infected by cave dwellers who have left the church for comfort reasons. And I really hope and pray with every ounce of kindness I have that they will eventually get out of their caves and come back into what God has called for them to be in. But there are cave dwellers out there, and they're miserable. Unless they find a purpose in the cave, that cave's going to develop a stronghold mentality, and then it will become a prison to them. You see, the place that you go to protect yourself becomes, at the end of the day, the prison that restricts you. So think about it in your life. What prison have you gone into? What prison may be in? What cave are you in? Look for something good in the cave. Look for a purpose in the cave. And then get out of there before it becomes your prison. Have you got that? Right, you've got to understand that first. Now, how do we do this? First thing, it's all about keeping hope alive. In the prison, you lose hope because your hope is determined about what has happened in the past. There's nothing more miserable than living according to what's happened in the past. That is a very powerful there is a powerful psychological truth that says if you let your past determine who you are in the present, you will of all people be most miserable. You know why? Because you can't fix it. You can't change it. It's done. And yet we spend so much time with our regrets and our guilt and our shame, looking at our past, that we forget, if I could just take my eyes off that and turn my eyes toward a future that is full of hope. Just have a look at some of the cliches that we have out there. Every cloud has a silver lining. You know, that's great. It's a cliche because it's true that in the darkness of where you're at, have a look outside and there's a light shining behind the cloud that is giving this cloud a silver lining. What about it's always darkest before the dawn? It may get worse in your darkness, but just be assured that there will come an end to it if you can just keep hope alive. What about the cliche says that there's a light at the end of the tunnel? All of these have got something to do with light. And there's some pessimists who are sitting in the cave with these, yeah, but it's just an oncoming train. You know, and we live in this world. But here's a cliche that I really love. You know, the cliche that says that God does his best work in the dark. Have you noticed that? That God is not developing character in comfort. Comfort is seriously overrated. And we're all praying for comfort. We want to be comfortable people. I got to tell you, God says, no. Can't develop any character in comfort. I develop character in darkness. And what God does in the night, he reveals in the light. And he's always done this from the time of creation. You know, a Jewish day begins at nightfall, begins at the end of the day. And it goes through the night to be born in the light the next day. And God in creation, what he did in night, he said, let there be shining in the light. He said, let there be creation, let there be light, let there be vegetation. And there was beginning and there was end morning of the first day. And what God did, in the night, he revealed in the light, and the glory of what he had made in the night was incredible. The whole world could just say, wow, God, look what you've made, man. Look at the world, the animals, the vegetation, the sea, the seashore, the creatures. God, what you did last night was awesome, but we only see it in the light. And God's work in the darkness of your life will one day be revealed in the light, and you will have developed character, which is what God is really concerned about. He's not concerned about your comfort. Trust me, Don't pray that God will give you good weather when you go to play golf. He's not concerned about the weather. And he's not concerned about your comfort. And I had a guy phone me one day and he said, Trev, I've got a big golf game on. Do you mind praying that God will give us good weather on the day? I'm thinking, what? What? Do you think God's worried about your darn golf game? He wants to develop character in you. It's not developed at a time of comfort. Here's another thing to keep hope alive, is you've got to look to the future. Let the future and the hope of a good future determine who you are in the present, not a messed up past. But here's another thing. You've got to do it in community. You've got to do this in community. If you go alone into your cave and you sit there all on your own, you're going to get deeper and deeper into trouble. You all know that. That's why my heart goes out to people like Job. Here was Job, who had 3 friends. They call them friends. But these 3 friends were all pessimists. And Job managed, that's what makes his story so significant. Despite the prevailing wisdom of people who gave him stupid advice, Job was still able to hold on to his hope in God. I prefer the story of the disciples who after Jesus, who they had raised so much hope, and he's going to be the Messiah. He's going to deliver us from the Romans. And now he's dead. We saw them crucify him, and they put a sword in his side, and now they've taken him and they put him in a grave, and they've rolled a stone in the way. Oh, my hope has gone. But what's the first thing they do when hope appears to have gone? They all go back together again. It wasn't long before those disciples found themselves in the upper room, and they were told, stay there until Pentecost and the Holy Spirit came. At least they were all together. You have 2 of them walking off on the way to Emmaus. They came back. Jesus met them on the way and said, what are you 2 guys doing here? Get back to where you can be in community, where you can love one another, even though you don't have the answers to all the problems. Be in community with one another. That, people, is what the church is all about. Just being in community with each other. And there's one more thing that keeps hope alive. I'm an old man now, and the older I get, the more I'm looking forward to that great day that we read about in the book of Revelation. And there are many great days that are depicted there, but for me the greatest one is the one that I find in Revelation 19, and it's verse 15. It's a picture of the final judgment. It's awesome. Listen to this. It's a picture of the winepress of God's fury. And the picture is that of Jesus in the winepress. Now, you know how they made wine in those days. They would grow the grapes. They would have this big wine press, and the farmer, you hope he washes his feet, would get into the wine press, and they would throw all the grapes in there, and he personally would stand on them, and he would crush all of their wine. And every juice, all that juice would come out of these broken grapes. And he would stand there and he would smash these things. And Revelation 19 gives us this picture of Jesus in the wine press. And he's standing on? He's standing upon everything that makes God's mad in this world. And I get this picture of us being there to throw stuff into the wine press. There's your devastating divorce, boom, in the wine press, and Jesus is standing on it. He hated that thing. There's that devastating situation at work where you lost your business, and Jesus hates that, so we throw that in the wine press, and Jesus stands upon it. There's HIV and AIDS. I personally want to throw that one in, because that's been a big deal for us in Africa. I want to throw HIV and AIDS in there. I want to throw every death, every destruction, every agonizing moment that you've had to go through, every disillusioning experience, you throw it in the winepress. And the picture is that of Jesus standing on it. He's crushing everything that has made God mad. And at the end of that, all of the suffering and all of sadness and all of the sickness has been crushed. And out of that comes the beauty of the wine of the suffering of the saints. And it's beautiful. But it only happens in God's time. And we look to the future. And we look to see, I'm going to watch there. I think you want to join me and throw Corona in there. I want to throw every wheelchair that somebody's had to live in because of some car accident. I want to throw it all in there and watch Jesus trample that stuff. And out of that beauty of all the suffering of the people will come this beautiful wine. That verse in Ecclesiastes, he makes all things beautiful in his time. Let the future determine who you are in the present, and people, not the past. You can't fix it. Don't go back there. Look to the future of the purpose that God has for you on this planet. Look to God for the future of the vision that he has for you as an individual. For goodness sake, people, get behind the vision of this good church, because that's going to determine so much about where the future of this community goes. It's about the future. Let's make sure we find that to be the truth. Maybe here's a thought. Maybe you need to get out of your cave of comfort. Esther, living in the comfort of a queen, and Mordecai comes to her one day and says, Esther, get out the cave now. You've lived in the comfort of comfort, the cave of comfort now. You've got to cross that line. You've got to take a risk, and you've got to save the nation. Fortunately, she did get out of her cave. I know a couple of other people who got out of caves very quickly. Jesus stood at the grave of a man who was in a cave. His name was Lazarus. Moved the stone away. He shouted, Lazarus, come out. Can you hear Jesus? Can you hear Gad, the prophet, saying, get out of your darn cave, you people. And when you stand on the outside of the cave, get rid of those things that have bound you, all that disillusionment, disappointment, despair. Get rid of that stuff, because God cannot use you while you've got a victim's mentality and you're living in pessimism from the stronghold that you developed while you're in the cave. Get rid of that stuff. And then I know another person who came out of a cave. He blew the stone away. He was in the cave for 3 days. He couldn't take it any longer. And he blew the stone away, because you can't be a king and rule from a cave. And Jesus is the king, people. He doesn't rule from a cave. He rules from his kingdom and his power and his glory. And Jesus is saying, is saying to you today, if you're sitting in the cave, look for something good. That's okay. Be a blessing in the cave. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works while you're in the cave. Shine a little of the light that you have into somebody else's darkness, because there's always somebody darker than you. And then ultimately, get out of the darn cave. Get rid of the things that have bound you, and fulfill with great joy and passion the future that God has for each one of you. But you've got to get out the cave. Maybe we should just pray right now. Let's just pray. God, we thank you that all things work together for good to those who love you. And we recognize, Lord, that the qualifying factor for things to work good is that we love you. If we don't love you, if we don't know you, then everything I've said means nothing. I pray that we would begin where you begin, by saying, do you love God? If you really love him, then all things will work according to his purpose for your good and his glory. Thank you, God, that we can look like 1 Corinthians 13 says, we look back over our lives and we look as through a glass darkly, because we don't see things as they really are. We only see vague impressions of things as we thought they were. But in the light of eternity, we will look back and we will see that sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to us has, in the light of where I am now, in the light of the future, become the best thing. That's a crazy thing. That you can take our deepest hurt and create for us our greatest mission for you. Lord, I pray for those who are in the cave of hurting and sadness. And I would never belittle their pain. It's been immense, I'm sure. But I do know, God, that there will come a day when you will call them out of that cave. As sad as it may have been, you will call them and say, it's time. It's time. I'll walk with you out of the cave. I'll walk with you into a newness of life and a newness of purpose. For those of us, God, who sit complacently in the cave of comfort, Lord, I pray you bring us a crisis that will shake us to be able to say there's no character being built in comfort. character is built in crisis. And I pray, God, we respond positively and intelligently to that which you bring to us. Thank you for Hulen Street Church. Thanks for Wes and his great team, for the elders, for the ministry leaders, for those who serve out there at the welcoming and the parking, and all those in the kids' church, those in the teenage ministry. Oh God, bless them, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys for having me today. It's been awesome. Thank you.